Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cradle News Roundup, your one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I am the news editor for the Cradle. And as usual, I'm joined by my colleagues, the content creator and writer for the Cradle, Karim Shami, and columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmin Narwani. And before we start, we just want to remind you to please leave a like, to share this video, to subscribe to our channel, to find us on other social media platforms, and more importantly, to check out our Patreon, where you can become a direct supporter of the Cradle. So today, let's get started with the horrific situation unfolding in the Gaza Strip, where first of all, the Israeli army has launched the so-called Gideons Chariots operation, which is meant to lead to the total conquest of the Strip and the forced displacement of its 2 million population. It started on Thursday night. Since then, we're talking about 600 Palestinians killed in attacks that resemble the first days of the genocide. The intensity of them, the ferocity of them. You have troops marching in, you have tanks. Earlier today, there was a full displacement order for Khan Yunis, for the entire city of Khan Yunis, which is the second largest city in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians are told everyone has to leave. They're simply not going to be anywhere safe. We are seeing this happen as last night, the Israeli government, well, actually not, the Israeli prime minister, approves the re-entry of aid to the Gaza Strip, citing intense U.S. pressure. He does not put this to a vote of the Security Cabinet or the cabinet at large. He makes it kind of like as an executive decision, causing a lot of an uproar among the ranks, right? With Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, etc., the most Jewish supremacists of his cabinet are completely against this. There is an asterisk to this decision from Netanyahu, right? The only 30 trucks have been allowed into Gaza as of this moment, as of today. We're talking about a catastrophic situation in which the UN, even before the start of the genocide, we're talking about Gaza needs 500 truckloads of humanitarian aid per day just to maintain themselves, right? This is the reality. So when we're talking about a limited amount of aid, we're just talking about 30 trucks. That's nothing. That's a drop in the ocean, especially considering that there has been a blockade ongoing for nearly 3 months in which no food has entered the Strip, no medicine has entered the Strip. We have seen the images of children wasting away to nothing. This is a completely, manufactured famine that is unfolding as we speak. And due to U.S. pressure, this very little aid starts coming in. We'll see if the shipments expand as the days go on. We know that this is a stopgap measure until the U.S. mechanism starts. This is something we'll get into a bit later. It's something we discussed a couple of weeks back in the program. This U.S. mechanism, going to be run by mercenaries and have many, many caveats before aid is delivered. At the same time, you have Steve Witkoff reports in Israeli media talking about him trying, communicating directly with Hamas and Israel, demanding pushing for a ceasefire. They're talking about like a 2-month ceasefire, cessation of hostilities. The Israelis obviously, are using famine, are using the mass killings as a form to pressure Hamas into accepting any deal, which includes, or their demand being, the disarmament. That this is something again that Hamas has said simply we're not going to do. So, having said all that, do you guys buy this that of the U.S. pressure, right? Why do you think the United States is telling Israeli leaders, in particular Benjamin Netanyahu, to kind of force his hand into allowing even a small trickle of aid, or is this just for the headlines, right?
It's a bit of both. It's bad PR. Trump doesn't like bad PR. Palestinians starving is bad PR. And his one ally, his main ally in the region is the cause of this. So I think he's definitely put the screws on Netanyahu. I don't think U.S. reports of the tensions in their relationship are at all over exaggerated. I think they're accurate, and now he's trying to mitigate the harm that may have caused, coming back from his Gulf trip. And don't forget, the other part of this is he spent 4 days surrounded by Persian Gulf Arabs who don't give a toss about the Palestinian cause. At the same time, what's happening in Gaza is can impact their own legitimacy and credibility, and it is a pain for them to sustain long term, right? They want to get ahead with economic agendas, do business with Israel, whatever it is, right? And uh and Gaza, or Netanyahu's renewed war in Gaza, is an obstacle to that. So, Trump comes away from this Persian Gulf trip, understanding full well, because I would argue that that is his agenda, is making money, not war, unless war
He's the deal maker,
money.
yes.
But actually, in the case of the two wars the U.S. is engaged in now, it's just a money pit, throwing money at Ukraine, throwing money at the Israelis. So I think I do think he forced their hand, Netanyahu's hand, to at least provide aid into Gaza. Now, like, he has not made any negative comments about Netanyahu's disgusting um, assault on civilians in Gaza over the weekend. So it's not like he's saying, don't conduct your war, though I
Mhm,
think
mhm,
that is also problematic, but it's not like where they're butting heads. It's like, do what you have to do to take away this argument, okay?
mhm.
Which is starving people in Gaza, because everyone can see that.
It's undisputable. Give us your thoughts, Karim. Go
So
ahead.
I agree with Charmin. It's they are doing this because of the bad PR, or maybe even they don't want Netanyahu anymore because they already gave him the needed time to finish that job, and he didn't, according to them. And
Mhm.
also we see what Witkoff did last week or last 10 days. He had like direct talks with Hamas, and the talks led to Hamas releasing the an American Israeli prisoner. I think this also shows us, yani, there's plans for Gaza. And also the thing that makes me think that they don't want Netanyahu is what France is doing. Usually we know France and UK
Mm,
and the Americans start to talk against a leader when they don't want him or when they feel that his end is near. And there were many remarks and many comments against Netanyahu in the past week coming out from France, that they don't accept what's happening in Gaza, and they don't want Netanyahu, and they don't want to like talk to Netanyahu suddenly after like 18 months or 17 months. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, and of course, what's happening in Gaza is we never saw something like this. And now they are saying more than 55,000 people killed, and most of them are civilians. Even Israelis are saying that 80% of them they are civilians. Yani, I think the exact number will be more than 90%. If the Israelis stand 80%, that means,
It's
yani,
much higher for
yeah,
sure.
it's much higher. And as you said, in the past 3 to 4 days, around 500 to 600 civilians died in Gaza, and that's a huge. And today they are saying that they will begin a new operation in Khan Yunis. As you said, also Khan Yunis is one of the biggest cities in Gaza. So I think Israel is trying to do what it can, and in this short time, because I think also the Israelis know that they have only short time remaining. Hala, we know many times before there were talks and everybody said there will be a ceasefire and the war is coming to an end. But I think what's happening in Israel uh, and the talks that are coming from Europe and from the United States, I think maybe there will be a ceasefire shortly. And
You
also
think
Spain
so?
and other countries. Yani. The comments are all against Israel. Previously, it wasn't like this.
yeah, and
So
just
to
to
go
make a
ahead.
point to
Mhm.
Karim's comments about the French um, statements against Netanyahu, on Friday, it was confirmed that the French and the Saudis are going to organize a UN General Assembly conference from June 17th to 20th. in which they were going to put the two-state solution back on the table, like a point of no return, they say. Meaning, if you
That's what the
undermine,
invitation, yeah.
yeah, if you undermine this, if you undermine the ability for a two-state solution to take place, this resolution will open you up for sanctions. Okay, of course, nobody can enforce sanctions from the UN General Assembly. However, if countries sign on to this, it suggests that unilaterally they can sanction Israel or whoever violates the two-state solution plan by just cutting off trade, etc., with no censure, right? With no repercussions. Now, this Emmanuel Macron, the French president's statements did, in fact, as Karim said, single out Netanyahu. Quote, I say it forcefully, what the government of Benjamin Netanyahu is doing today is unacceptable. And he called the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza, quote unquote, shameful. The downside of this is, there's always like, can't trust the French. Um,
Can't
and
trust the West.
yeah, and they have said that um, one of the things that also could be advanced during this is, if all the countries accept a Palestinian state, UN General Assembly, um, and put that as a point of no return for any country in the world, um, this could also propel forward um, efforts to get states to normalize relations with Israel. So
Indeed.
that's the little backdoor,
Yeah, because it asks for both, right? Like this whole
yeah.
because this information is based on the actual invitation for this
Mhm.
summit, and it talks about like recognition for both states, right? So it's kind of like a recognition of an independent Palestinian state, which, let's be honest, after everything that has happened over the past 18 months, what is that going to look like? First of all, and second of all, this is kind of like a bit of like stealthy normalization. I want us to go back to a couple of points. Something Karim mentioned that I think is very interesting because this is a story actually at the Cradle that went very, very viral. I'm sure many
Mm.
of our readers already saw it, and it's about the Israeli army admitting that 80% of those killed in Gaza are uninvolved civilians. And this is based on a quote provided by the Israeli military to Hamakom, a Hebrew news outlet, in which they say that their data shows that approximately 4.5 civilians were killed for every Palestinian resistance fighter supposedly killed in Gaza since the breach of the ceasefire in March. So that's, how can you pretend that this is not a
So the
genocide at that point?
80% number is not a figure that the Israeli army spokesman gave the Israeli publication. What they said was around 500 uh,
Yes, of nearly like
Hamas
5,000 killed. Yeah,
combatants out of
out of
no,
wait, I
out
have
of
the number here.
2,780 or something like that. People killed from
2,208,
from
2,780, yes, you're right.
yeah, from March 18th. Okay, so this is
Mm.
right. But
Yeah,
it actually measures up to a lot of data we've gotten from non-Hamas sources on the number of people
yeah.
dead there. And
The
and and,
Lancet
and many
study,
people think that number is much, much higher because we've seen who Israel considers a combatant. A male, female, baby, elderly,
yeah.
during
And
the course of the
even
last 20
child,
months.
even
Even
child.
journalists, yani what they did also by
Yeah,
targeting
aid workers,
Hassan Saleh
journalists.
in his room in a hospital, and he's wounded, and he's
Mm,
a journalist. This is too much. That was too much. And we in the Cradle, we follow this guy. We used to get news from him, and he
yeah.
was wounded. After 1 week of him being wounded inside a hospital, you bomb the hospital because to kill him,
Yeah,
and then they released photos of him
yeah.
standing with people that are in Hamas. Now, wherever you go in your
Mm,
city, you can take pictures of the leaders or whatever. It doesn't mean that you're with them. And even
Exactly.
if he's with them, he is a journalist. He's not a fighter, and he was inside
He's-
a hospital. And
He
what
was
they did
inside a
is
hospital,
extreme.
exactly.
Was so extreme.
So,
So
I
the
mean,
other,
really, this is like we should make clear any efforts, any pressures the U.S. has brought to bear on Netanyahu and his government to relax things in Gaza is just on the unavoidable humanitarian side, and that pressure, um, Trump's tactics are also being backed up by a slew of European leaders and others, and public sentiment, right? We saw the biggest Nakba Day protest in London. 500,000 people showed up for that. So, I mean, just globally, the attention has refocused back on Gaza because what's happening there is criminal. So Trump, again, what he could say is, no, you can't bomb Gaza. I mean, I think a ceasefire is part of his goal because that's where Netanyahu let him down. He stopped Trump's ability to get back captives by relaunching war in Gaza and
Yeah,
breaking the ceasefire. So I think that's where we're headed. Especially we've seen with Macron stepping up in this regard, even forcing a two-state solution onto Israel. Something just
allegedly.
allegedly an aside that just fascinated me is, as you know, last week the Arab summit meeting convened in Baghdad
What?
without
What, Sharmin?
the Arab summit
The
meeting.
Arab League. Eh,
Right.
Before we move on to
But
that, I just want to give you something because there's some interesting information about the actual operation that's happening in Israel and that Israel Hayom was in Gaza. I'm sorry, the Zionist final solution. Really, that's the only way to describe this. It's according to Israel Hayom, Gideon's Chariots is going to last about a year. This invasion, this is the one that started last week. Minimum is going to be a year, and apparently the IDF soldiers or officers are raising concerns. They're complaining internally that they're not being allowed a full force approach, that they are not actually going to be allowed to push Palestinians to the south, that they complain about not being allowed to cut the water supply to Gaza. They talk about like, oh, water's still flowing, so like, that helps Hamas. So internally, right, there's also this huge opposition to like a continued war, another year of war for Israel, for the reservists who are
mm,
already refusing, right? Like in increasing numbers, they're refusing their call-ups because they've already been called up like 5, 6 times. This is going to be the seventh time, and at the same time, you have the Haredim, right, the ultra-Orthodox, dodging
mhm.
the draft order, saying we're not going to participate in this. And Netanyahu just like spinning the wheels, as you said, right, for Trump. I just wanted to mention that because I think it's interesting, that
Yeah, yeah.
that they are
They are
planned
so
to
they are so evil. They have to give such excuses. As
exactly.
Netanyahu said, I didn't want aid to enter, but United States pressured me, so we will let
Yeah.
some aid enter. And he's saying,
Before
I'm
we
so
move on,
evil, I have to explain myself.
before we move on, the one last thing I want to get your thoughts on about this is the interview Donald Trump gives to Fox News. I think it was on Friday, in which they ask him, "Are you frustrated with Benjamin Netanyahu?" And he says, "No, he's got a tough situation. You have to remember, October 7 was one of the most violent days in the history of the world. Bibi, he's an angry man, and he should be because of October 7." And then he says, he's fought hard and bravely. This is what Donald Trump says upon his return from the Gulf, from the UAE. And again,
Yeah,
to
but
what you
that's
mentioned,
what
Charmin,
that's what he said about Al Qaeda's leader that he met in the Gulf as well. I mean, I think he's got a standard. Good looking, tough, brave, must
he
be
called him
hard.
attractive again, by the way, during the Fox News
Yeah,
interview. He was like,
yeah.
very attractive, Shara.
Trump's man crush on Al Qaeda leader Jolani. But I mean, in this case, come on, guys. The Israeli U.S. relationship is a foundational stone of Washington's foreign policy around the world, and he has to, having let Netanyahu sweat for a good 2 weeks or so, he now has to use some placating language because don't forget, his 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 base is a mixture of Republicans and MAGA guys, right?
You
Um,
can't make a Miriam Adelson too angry.
No, actually, I think he can because
Yeah, I think.
he's not gonna run for president again. He's got already gotten her money, so I
The
don't think
check
that's,
clear.
yeah, the check cleared. So I don't think that's an issue. I don't think Trump's thinking about Miriam Adelson. I think he's thinking about, oh God, these Arabs in this shithole in the shithole countries I just visited are actually like ready to do business. They're talking my language. Let's move on this. And then Netanyahu's like always the downer in Trump's every day. That, I mean, it's logical, you know. Um, so Trump made some mistakes. He allowed Netanyahu to do what he wanted, and he gave him some time to do it. And now it's become a pain in the butt. He wants to do business, and he's going to get that money because don't forget what the Gulf promised him,
It was like
what the Saudis,
1.4
the
trillion, right?
Emiratis, yeah, and the Qataris is over a 10-year period. Okay. It doesn't matter. You get the promise, you get the PR blitz around that. But he also has to deliver something. I mean, he's getting paid for something. Like we discussed last week, the tables have turned a little bit, the Gulf having money and the US not, has changed the equilibrium in the relationship a bit, particularly with such a transactional US president.
But he's the master. I mean, what do you think Qatar or Saudi Arabia asked Trump to do, or what they want? What do they want from the United States?
They want
Weapons.
him to make the Gaza problem go away from them so they can do business as they want to with Israel, with Iran, with whoever. Okay. And by the way, he also made some very placating statements, very, very different to what he did in his first Gulf trip in his first term, where he blasted Iran.
Mhm.
His comments about Iran in his speeches were very, very muted and sort of peace seeking, negotiation seeking. Because let's be honest, the White House put out feelers before this trip to see what would be palatable because they wanted Trump to leave with the maximum cash haul, right? And they saw very quickly that neither the Saudis, the Emiratis, or the Qataris were remotely interested in a US war with Iran or a US/Israeli war with Iran that could spill over their borders and affect what they want, which is, for the Saudis, Vision 2030 economic plan. The Emiratis have similar growth plans, so do the Qataris. They want to build connectivity. They want to grow their relationships. They want to provide, importantly, transit routes to Europe. No transit routes are possible when there are like IEDs sitting along those routes, i.e., conflict zones, wars, bombings, you name it. Okay, regime change operations. They want a clean sweep. This is kind of why they're all sucking up to Syria because Syria is an important geography that abuts the Mediterranean Sea and is en route from the Persian Gulf to Europe. A
Today,
route.
today, just
So you
something
think
interesting as
they
well.
asked Trump to stop the war in Gaza, not to like finish Hamas? Because in my
No, I
thoughts,
think I think I think
it's
they're
completely the
they're very
opposite.
pragmatic. Those guys were, well, except for Qatar, the Saudis and the Emiratis wanted Hamas finished. They've seen after 20 months that's not remotely happening. Okay, but what is left of Gaza is, I mean, everybody in the world is outraged by this, and
Yeah,
for
even
sure,
even
Except
the
Gulf
biggest
countries.
no, even the biggest Zionist cheerleader, Piers Morgan, all of a sudden found
yeah.
something to complain about of what Israel is doing.
Yeah, because his
I w-
ratings are shifting.
are
Yeah,
shifting, you think?
but that's the point. I mean, politicians give a damn about ratings in some instances. So, and certainly the Gulf leaders, it's like, okay, we gave Israel a chance. It can't do this. It did neuter some things for us, but they also see the possibility of the resist. They because of their war with Yemen, they also are horrified by the U.S. pullback from Yemen. Okay, because now that means they have to deal with the U.S. isn't going to even deal with Yemen for the Israelis. Certainly not going to deal with Yemen on behalf of the Persian Gulf countries. So they basically are like, okay, everyone's been given enough time. This isn't working out. Let's do peace deals. Let's get things moving on. So I think that's what the interest of the Persian Gulf monarchies is, not Gaza itself per se.
No, no, it's not. But something interesting happened this morning that the Likud party submitted a bill to the Knesset labeling Qatar a state sponsor of
Yeah.
terrorism. And the draft describes Qatar as a wolf in sheep's clothing and the world's biggest global investor in global terrorism, citing their alleged support for the Taliban, Islamic State, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Qatar giving money to Hezbollah. That's a bit of a
What
new
are
one.
the Israelis going to do? Qatar is the base for the U.S. Central Command's um,
The
headquarters
fifth base,
in the
fifth
region,
fifth fleet, right?
and the Fifth Fleet, correct. And here's the thing. The Israelis and the Americans, mind you, have complained about Qatar from you know, as far back as 2010 that came to our
Mhm.
attention. We saw these in the WikiLeaks State Department cables, where the Israelis constantly complained about Qatar, and second to Qatar, Oman, because, and I think they actually are quoted saying something like, the goal of these people, they're actually following their own interests, you know.
Yeah, but
But don't forget, I mean, going after Qatar has a downside too. Qatar was the only country willing to come in and provide salaries in Gaza to keep, the siege, even pre-October 7th siege of Gaza, like controllable, so people could eat and function and get some basic salaries. And
Mhm.
this, as we know, was a deal concluded between Netanyahu and Qatar. So now to convert him into uh, to convert Qatar's image into one of a terrorist state is just, it's not going to fly with the Americans. It's not going to resonate with Israelis who've seen Netanyahu's double dealing on this issue. And of
The
course he's
Qatar
doing
gate.
this because he's so worried that Qatar is the most capable regional actor who can force through a deal with Hamas. And let me tell you something. Why did these soundings happen after Trump's trip to the Gulf? Because Qatar paid Trump a nice handsome sum. They are so scared that Trump will just start talking to Qatar and Hamas directly. And so they're trying to vilify them. I mean, the language of vilifications from the Israelis goes back so many decades, from like terrorists to pariahs to mullahs to, you know, Islamist extremists.
Mhm.
This is the language they've utilized forever to marginalize certain parties so that they cannot be um, considered for actual negotiations and talks. And now they're trying to introduce marginalization language for Qatar, but it's not going to work, in my view.
No, I mean, what is going to work for is to throw a wrench at the ceasefire, right? What we're discussing, because now I feel like we're heading for an implosion in Israel with this ceasefire situation, because you have the U.S. really pushing for it, as you said. Witkoff is talking directly to Hamas, and now you have them, trying to pass a bill that essentially says Qatar is a sponsor of
Can I ask you
terrorism.
something?
Go ahead.
Who wanted to pass this bill?
The Likud, a Likud minister. Likud is Netanyahu's party.
Yeah, yeah, I know
The
some people
name?
in the Likud, not like because
Likud lawmaker Moshe Saada.
I think this guy doesn't know the exact role of the Gulf countries on Qatar. So because we all
Maybe
know that
he's not in the payroll, right?
yeah, because it's obvious that Al Udeid air base, which is in Qatar,
Mhm.
is being used to
Yeah.
deliver weapons to Israel since like 2 years.
And one thing I forgot to mention this actually, JD Vance canceled his trip to Israel today, and it's allegedly because of the final solution, Gideons, Chariots. What's happening?
So
I would
And
imagine
Witkov
it's
too.
pressure, like a pressure from somewhere else,
And
not
Witkov
a
too,
Vance
he
decision.
canceled it.
we're going to have I think it's going to come out at the end of this week, a feature on GOP deep state, or deep state versus MAGA, because I think the differences between these two are really starting to emerge. And this is going to be a fight moving forward. And one sign of this, I mean, um, Trump's speech in the Gulf was went off on the neocons, went off on them, okay, and their forever wars. When I say neocons, I mean neoliberals too. I mean, Hillary Clinton was a neocon,
Yeah,
and her whole cabal were
or
neocons. I
John
mean,
Boltons of the
just
world.
yeah, the warmongers, right?
Mhm.
But now we're seeing a clash between their forever wars system and the MAGA folks, who America first, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, this is so critical. This really could unleash a U.S. civil war. I don't know if we're talking about weapons yet, but I mean literally hate oozing onto the streets, right? Because uh, because now Trump is going to be a much more active president than he was in term one. That's usually the case. Like, either, well, you can become a lame duck or you can just fly high with your agenda because you have some space. And so I think this is Trump's chance. And he's getting a lot of criticism from MAGA because, talking about war in Iran, launching war in Yemen, all those things. And he heard those uh those criticisms because what has he done? He switched to, putting the negotiations track with Iran uh in front of his agenda, and he decided, announced that he would no longer be bombing Yemen. Uh, both of these things to Israel's detriment. So he has heard the MAGA crowd, and now whatever he does in this regard, right? So demilitarize America overseas, right? Uh, and pull back from war fronts. I think this is where the fight starts, and we saw this with the Comey, the former FBI director.
Yeah, James Comey, right?
Comey, right, like his tweet or post or whatever, the 8647, right, which people understood to be like a sort of call for nixing Trump, and then the big debate saying, no, no, he didn't really mean that. But everybody, I mean, I looked it up in the Urban Dictionary. It means killing.
Oh,
Okay.
really?
It means, well, it comes from this idea of like the old gangsters in America that would go 80 miles out of the city and dig 6 feet down. So 86ing someone. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You live and you
Just
learn.
you live and you learn. But I mean, here's the thing. So those guys are just that kind of criticism has that kind of talk with the among the warmongers in public didn't come out until Trump made his Gulf speech where he went off on the neocons. So we're going to see that happen too.
The repercussions.
And
What
this,
was it?
by the way, like falls right in line with what the Israelis and particularly Netanyahu have always feared about a Trump presidency is when they lose control of him or when he decides to pursue his actual MAGA agenda, America first.
Yeah,
Zionism and America first are not compatible. They're completely incompatible.
they're
Okay.
opposite of each other.
And he's
And
going to
then
discover that.
And let's not forget, right, that this whole he comes back from the Gulf trip, and Moody downgrades the U.S. credit rating, right? Like they removed their last perfect credit rating for the first time in the country's history. So
Ooh.
really, Donald Trump not exactly
Globalists are also after him. Globalists, neocons, that whole, I mean, really everybody in the deep state.
is
It's
after this
funny.
man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to comment on two things. First,
Yeah.
there's many reports that came out and many U.S. outlets published it that one of the main reasons why they stopped their bombings on Yemen because a Yemeni air defense missile came too close to an F-35,
Mm.
Yes,
and
I saw that.
this was very important to mention. And I just want to also add a little
So
piece
why
of
is that
information.
important? Because like people seeing that, like the Houthis, okay, Ansar Allah taking out an F-35 was just the Rubicon
A,
you can't cross.
a little too
Because
close for
birds
comfort.
have taken down F-35s. I don't know why, you know.
No, but it's very interesting, Karin.
It took it down. No, but of course, when this happens, you can see what will happen in the U.S. stocks and like
Because remember what
many
happened
companies.
with the Chinese jets in India, Pakistan, right? That they unexpectedly became the talk of the
Profiles.
town, and at
Yeah.
the same time you have the AKA Houthis. What are their air defenses? First of all, right? Like what air defense are we talking about? I don't actually know
Well,
if
I
we
mean,
They,
it's
know.
they
not
have air,
like, yeah.
What do they
Go
have? What
ahead,
do they
Gideons.
have?
they have air defenses that date back prior to 1990, before they became one country. They
Wow.
were Soviet air defense missiles. They has the
With that, they
S-200.
also shot down the most expensive fighter jet in history.
Yeah, it's the same that downed the I forgot
The
the name.
drones.
No, down and also in the 90s.
Hmm.
U.S. Warplanes over Serbia, the S-200, if I'm not mistaken.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but of course,
Okay.
yeah, and
Mhm.
the second piece of information that also Trump proposed a $1 trillion defense budget for 2026. $1
Ah,
What are you
yeah,
trillion
talking
yeah.
dollar.
about? We know about this.
But that's like, at this point, their defense budget is already closing in on 900 billion. But it is, right? Like, defense spending is not going down. Remember, like, the whole Dodge, Elon Musk, that he could, I think he, at the end of the day, he was barely able to cut like $25 billion from the budget, right? And before everybody started setting Tesla dealerships on
The real
fires.
number is lost because then they said, "Oh, we did this mistake." Then they said, "We returned this," so the number is lost now. You can't know.
Even
It's
the
very
National
difficult.
Endowment for Democracy is back now, right? Like Rubio announced that last week, that the NED is essentially back under new leadership, one would imagine. But same goals also, one would imagine. In any case, let's move on. Let's discuss, albeit briefly, I would imagine, the Arab League, right? The Arab League Summit in Baghdad, where the young and attractive Ahmad al-Shara was not able to participate because he faces arrest. And what came out of it, right? Like, what can we say about the Arab League Summit?
Well, a declaration condemning what was happening in Gaza, which
Okay,
okay,
all
is
right.
standard
We do
fare
that every
now.
week in this podcast.
Yeah, yeah. But I tell you who was the most dazzling Arab at the summit. Dazzling, absolutely, stole the show and stole the thunder of
Who was
the
it?
Arab moderates. No, is Spanish Prime Minister
Oh,
Pedro Sanchez,
Oh,
who attended as a guest and said that world leaders should, quote, intensify our pressure on Israel to halt the massacre in Gaza, particularly through the channels afforded to us by international law, end quote. Sanchez says that his government in Madrid planned a UN resolution demanding an ICJ ruling on Israel's war methods. To me, the greatest Arab in the room.
and I mean, Sanchez, a man who says he stops Israel, yeah, shipments of weapons to Israel, but at the same time they continue, right? Like the Spanish government has been caught lying at least twice about this, about like banning
Yeah.
shipments, and then it continues. He's Spaniard Erdogan. He goes out, says the right
Well,
things, but then behind
no,
closed
I mean, I
doors.
have to
better
say,
than
like,
nothing. I'm okay with this now.
even like with Trump, the people who are bucking the whole warmongering, the neocon strategy, right, for the world that has been in place for decades, those people, I think, get undermined by their own officials and their own, what is it called, ministries. I
Mhm.
don't know if there's a direct line there. I mean, he could say no weapons, but then a whole like bunch of things that support weapons can go out and trade. It's not easy. I mean,
They're
remember in
NATO
Trump's
members at the end of the day.
yeah, and in Trump's first presidency, we found out later that the intelligence community and the Pentagon were hiding information from their commander in chief to ensure an outcome that they wanted. So who knows what
So
Sanchez is dealing with?
besides Sanchez's dashing good looks,
Yeah.
what else can we say about the Arab League Summit? Honestly, I really feel like there's so little there, so little substance.
Yeah,
But
I
they
don't
pledged,
I
right? I think Iraq pledged like 40 million reconstruction for Gaza. What is that going to do? Like pick up some of the rubble, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah. Can you imagine? They give 1.4 trillion to Trump, and then Iraq, for instance, that hosted the Arab Summit, gives something like 20 million or 25 million for Gaza.
Truly shameful. Truly shameful. Any thoughts,
Yeah,
Karim?
it's not a new thing, and since I was a kid, uh, we know that nothing happens from the Arab Summit. It's not like this time it was like this. Never,
Yeah.
never it solved anything.
Mm.
Okay.
And we have something in Lebanon. Yani when we look downwards, and if somebody asks you at what are you looking at, we tell them at the Arab Summit. You know what I mean? And it's so low. And I heard this joke like I was like 5, 6 years old, and it's still ongoing. So
It's still relevant. Another thing that happened today, it's Marco Rubio said that the sanctions on Syria are not going to be lifted, that they're going to give them waivers, but that they don't expect an actual full lifting of the sanctions from Syria, because I think they're
Yeah.
talking like the mechanisms aren't even in place to do that.
See, this is where this article I'm talking about that we'll publish in the Cradle towards the end of the week comes into play. You really have many instances in which you're seeing a fight between Trump's MAGA officials and Trump's neocon officials, right?
Mhm.
I do think MAGA in the end has an edge, at least right now. Right now, MAGA's on a roll, okay? And that could switch tomorrow because everyone is, you know, pulling out all their sharpened knives to win at this game. All right. They've
Mhm.
got entire careers and possibly, you know, second or third vacation homes riding on this. And so, for instance, we're hearing that JD Vance and Tulsi Gabbard are very strong MAGA um, visionaries, right? Uh, Listen, guys, in the comments, don't think we love these people. We're just literally stating. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, is she a Hindu supremacist? I really don't know, and I don't care. We're here not to see, if she has a good marriage or who she hangs with and what her secret thoughts are about Muslims. I literally mean in this case, she is much more MAGA person, as is JD Vance, than Marco Rubio, for instance, Mike Waltz, others. So we're going to see through decisions like this who comes out. And it may just be an ongoing battle. We might see this for the whole 4 years. One side wins one battle, the other side is then given chips to look good. We will see. But I think this is heading, the fact that you have these two wings of the Republican Party uh, is heading towards a colossal internal fight that could potentially redefine American foreign policy.
And on the other side, I read that Kamala Harris is what is it that he said, the headline, that she is considering what it means to be a governor, right? Because she's like the last little figure that the Democrats have. Who knows
No,
what's
no,
going to
no.
happen?
They're all like that. The Democrats are neoliberals and the Republicans, that one half of them are neocons. But what this means, why you have such flip flopping on Syria sanctions, is because the MAGA folks are thinking, "Ugh, Syria should hold, okay, what do you want? Gulf? Oh, you want us to talk to him? Okay, 1.4 trillion. Okay, I'll have a word with him
Yeah.
and call him hot and
Um,
good looking." And then on the other hand, the others back at the administrators in Washington, D.C., plus the neocons are viewing this differently. The intelligence community, the military, US's allies are viewing this very differently, maybe. So, you know, I think, like we said in last week's podcast, the the wind is going to blow hot and cold on Syria sanctions. I don't believe Ahmed al-Sharaa will get relief for his al-Qaeda government anytime soon. He will be thrown crumbs. But is it all going to is are the it, are the gates going to open? The floodgates going to open? No.
Charmaine,
but
it already happened. It already happened. There is no sanctions on Syria.
What are you talking about?
It's a deal done.
No, no, no,
For
no.
me,
That
it's a deal done,
No,
Charmaine.
no, but
The,
okay, okay, because he said
he
it. What I'm saying is,
yes, خلاص, he
did you
said it.
not? Okay, we right away, people in the U.S. administration have said it's not possible. There are some sanctions that are executive order, and Trump can overturn those. But the Caesar Act is a congressional act, and it cannot be just thrown out like that.
Okay,
Votes
just let
have to happen. No, no, no. Sorry, Karim. I'm just saying, I mean, Esteban started the section saying that Marco Rubio said there's, no reversal of
I
Syrian
know, I know.
sanctions. We might have exceptions. All right.
But for instance, just to say my thoughts, he had $10 million bounty on his head. Okay,
and
and
they
they
Yeah.
lifted it.
removed it like after 2 months, and he traveled, and people saw him. So uh, this bounty didn't matter back then, and now the sanctions will not matter.
I
The
think
Syrians are not expecting money from the United States now.
I think what you're
A Saudi Arabian prince can go and put 1 billion in Syria without anybody telling him why you are doing this. If I
That
have a company
that
in
may be the
Lebanon,
case, but Karim, that is also a recipe for corruption, which will make the Syrian state even weaker.
of
If
course,
that's the
he's
way
Al
they're going to
Qaeda, Sharmin. Of course, there
No,
will be
listen. So
corruption.
again, a big fight between the neocons who, Al-Qaeda in Syria was their project. ISIS in Syria and Iraq was their project. So they want to pave a path for the HTS-led government. And then you have the MAGA folks, America Firsters, who've been reared on this concept of, um, Islamic extremists are really bad and the US needs to protect its security is about, marginalizing these people. And those guys are going to have, I think the Tulsi Gabbards, for instance, are going to have a real problem with that, as we've seen in her statements. So
I
let's move on from this because it's just guesswork at this point.
No, actually, I just want to say that I see Karim's point because I feel like what's been happening, in particular with the situation in Gaza, is that
Mm.
international law has really been shown to be an
Mm.
absolute meaningless, as meaningless as can be. So there's a likelihood, right, that if businesses or like international organizations start dealing with Syria, they might not face the same pressure as before. I wanted to mention
Or
one other
sanctions.
thing.
They might not face sanctions. They might not face
Exactly.
punishments. And I agree with that. But what we're talking about is large multinationals coming to Syria or like Arab monarchs tossing money at the top. Because don't forget, they're also vying. The Saudis and the Emiratis are vying for influence in China to offset the Qatari and Turkish influence in China and Syria. And so, these fights are going on. Everyone's just vying. It's going to make Syria. I mean, if Syrians thought the Assad government was corrupt, they ain't seen nothing yet.
Exactly. And this is what I wanted to mention, because remember when Saudi and Qatar announced that they're going to pay off Syria's World Bank debt, right? A debt of $15 million, which in international terms is nothing. It's chump change.
Mm.
Is MBS finds that inside one of his shoes.
Yeah.
So
It's
Yeah,
what
about
what do
how
they
much
do?
they're
the wheel of
contributing
the
to Gaza.
airplane, the wheel of the airplane that
Exactly.
they gave to Trump is like
So
$15 million.
so they pay that, and then all of a sudden the World Bank can come in and they can
Mhm.
just funnel as much money as they want into Syria. Who knows where that's going to go? Because I would dare someone in the comments to tell me, when has the IMF and the World Bank lifted a country out of poverty? When have any of these multilateral organizations actually helped development and not just sunk a nation into debt? And that's what Syria is going to become now, right? It's going to become a pit hole for debt, and the Syrians are going to be, left holding the bag. Meanwhile, your Sharas and your et ceteras are going to be, like a Scrooge McDuck situation, jumping into the pool full of money. Okay,
All of the Arab regional um, actors and Turkish one as well, and Western ones are really ultimately okay with Syria descending into chaos and being divided. This starts to get more and more clear every day. So they're Iraqifying Syria. That is the agenda. That is what is going to happen as long as HTS continues to rule Damascus. And the only actors who don't want to see Syria divided are potentially Iran, Russia, and China, because more for anything because they're against the imperial projects of weakening
yeah,
states. They stand for the upholding of international law, meaning sovereignty and territorial integrity as being the safeguard of the global
of
order,
international
as
relations, yeah.
as was it as it was intended. And doing this to countries is the opposite of what Russia, Iran, China seek.
So at this point, we're seeing kind of the Persian Gulf countries really, take center stage in a way, in particular with the U.S. or Western relations, and that this also extends. We had this feature at the Cradle on Friday about kind of the Persian Gulf's switch from Pakistan to India, right, which also speaks to the current situation. Uh, what do we have about this, and why is this like such a I would say like such an interesting thing that's happening at this moment, right? That we're seeing all of these Gulf monarchies all of a sudden turn their back, I guess, on the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for the Hindu supremacist government in New Delhi.
Gina, first of all, I just want to take a second to pat the Cradles back on this because um, in the midst of all these crazy, crazy changes and the fluidity of the international political scene, um, sometimes we do really good work in looking at an angle that is really relevant to this region and nobody's looking at least not in English. Um, let's not forget that Modi, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Indian Prime Minister, was in Jeddah when the attack in Kashmir happened, in which two
Literally.
dozen Indian tourists were killed. And the Saudis, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Modi put out a joint statement condemning the the terrorism, and without assigning blame specifically. Okay, but why were the Persian Gulf capitals so ready to diffuse the situation in South Asia? Okay, they all jumped on board. In the end, there were something like 30 countries that jumped on board to diffuse the Pakistan India fight, because there's a lot of vested. I mean, nobody wants two nuclear powers escalating against each other. Second, there are a lot of interest tied up in it, and this is why I think like a lot of countries are just much more interested and moving along the Trump flow, which predates Trump, because the Chinese have been doing this forever, as well as the Russians and Iranians. Let's be more transactional. Let's do economy, development, etc., and leave wars aside. Okay. But the Persian Gulf states have a lot at stake in something like this. Why are the Gulf states then in this conflict, I think noticeably um, played a neutral role instead of favoring Pakistan as they often did in the past? And I mean, okay, so, you would say, for instance, that the Pakistani army was integral in the 70s and 80s and so forth, even later, in buoying the Saudi military and training them, in helping fight their wars and conflicts, okay, and leading some of them on the, ground wars. And then in 2015, Pakistan refused to do so when the Saudis launched their war in Yemen. Was this a game changer? No. It is something that could have influenced the Saudis, but not to, in any significant way. What changed, however, is how the Gulf states started to view India. Okay, India's
Mhm.
rise as a multipolar center, India's economic growth, etc. So, as an example, India is now the top consumer of fossil fuels from the Persian Gulf and is the region's fastest growing oil importer. Okay, big market is India. The Indian tech sector has, in the last decade, began attracting massive investment from Persian Gulf sovereign wealth funds. Okay, so the Saudis alone have pledged more than 100 billion in Indian investments, and the UAE plans to pour in 50 billion. The Qatar is 10 billion. But trade between India and the Arab world hit over almost 220 billion in last year. And Persian Gulf trade tops 160 billion of that. Okay, so India Pakistan trade has reached a new high, and what the Indians are interested in, the tech sector and refineries, etc., is India's providing that with them. So the Modi government's growing relations and closeness with the U.S. and its increasing naval capabilities in the Arabian Sea are definitely of value to the Persian Gulf monarchies. Modi also, his Hindutva ideology has, and let's be frank, anti-Islam ideology, ironically cozying up to, Saudi Arabia, which is Islam's two holiest sites of Mecca and Medina, and then of course the Gulf states, also the rest of the Gulf states being Muslim countries. So Modi's
What a shock.
ideology, as it's taken hold, um, India, this new India, has emerged as a major arms purchaser of Israeli military hardware and has worked very closely with the Israeli military and is being viewed as a strategic partner of Tel Aviv's. So the eyes of normalization seeking or normalization um, countries in the Persian Gulf, uh, of course, turn to opportunities India offers in this field, because India becomes like a really handy way to detract from the Gulf's direct relations with Israel. That these are views that don't do well in the region. But India is still viewed as a non-aligned global South powerhouse, et cetera, where they can openly, or not openly, but like more quietly do business with Israel. Um, but I think the real pivot to India in like more immediate times lies in this US-backed India to Europe route underdeveloped, the International Middle East Corridor, or IMEC, which seeks to link India via the Persian Gulf through routes, okay, to Israel and onward to Europe,
Mhm.
essentially bypassing and undermining China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? Of course, India and China not the best of friends, right? So India has real benefit from trying to take a swipe at China in the roots war, the war over corridors, right? That connect Asia within itself and then onward to Europe. So, I think these are, so it's not so much that Pakistan has, you know, that the Gulf countries have downgraded their relationship with Pakistan. It's been a natural turn of events as India's become far more useful to them and a bigger trading partner and a better strategic partner that we've been all their
Mhm.
difficult relations publicly, of course, with
Yeah.
the Israel, the United States, etc. Easy peasy done via India. And so this is a big shift. And interestingly, how is Pakistan viewing all of this? Well, Sharif, the Pakistani prime minister, is heading to Iran this week, I think. I think it's this
Mhm.
week or next week. Um,
Soon, for sure.
where, that happened quickly. I mean, I think Pakistan got to see how China, for instance, saved its ass, right? I mean, it was
Mhm.
Chinese fighter jets and Chinese missiles and Chinese training and Chinese joint Pakistani Chinese air exercises that put Pakistan in the position it was in these few days of dogfights and confrontation that made Pakistan, emerge as a winner in the eyes of many. And for sure, while Iran has great relations with India and with Pakistan, I think Pakistan started to see where its interests lay. It didn't get the help it would have wanted from the Persian Gulf Arab monarchies. China was right there. Uh, uh, and of course, Iran was, I think, genuinely neutral, but obviously favoring a situation in which the Israeli US side wouldn't benefit. And that
Okay.
came in handy for Pakistan.
Wasn't India the country that was reselling Russian oil to Europe? That at one point
Yes.
during the big
Yeah.
sanctions.
Now, India and Russia have had a historic relationship, close relationship. They continue to have very close relations, but Modi's ideology, I think, um, puts
A bit too
him
extreme.
right alongside people like Trump and people like Netanyahu, etc. So
Mhm.
Modi himself doesn't control every decision that gets made in India. I think he has good relations with Putin, but I'm just saying, like, foundationally, constitutionally, Modi is that new right that's emerging on the
Mm.
global stage.
No, it's very interesting, all of this, and I would say, I will tell our listeners to go and look for this feature. It's called the Persian Gulf Pivot, betting on India sidestepping Pakistan, because as you often like to remind us, Sherman, right? This is all the moves in the great game, and that my view of it, it's like it's the war creep towards China. At the end of the day, this is why Trump's doing what he's doing with Netanyahu, and etc. Right?
Mm,
Like everyone's kind of like choosing a side at this point. I don't think there's really an off ramp
yeah.
for
And these
this. And
conflicts are reverberating. I mean, India, Pakistan, people who don't care sort of, it's kind of like the people, why, sort of global interest in Syria during the conflict there for over 10 years was kind of surprising, and I think it's like people sense that this is where things would get decided. And there was a
Mhm,
victor, more or less, that came out of Syria, and then a coup d'etat that flipped that. Okay.
mhm,
So the pro US, pro Israel side has been, on an upswing. And then India, Pakistan happens, and like, boom, in just a few days, people saw Indian, Western, Israeli military equipment could just be owned, by
by
a
Chinese.
junior, a more junior partner militarily or adversary. So a lot of mindset shifted then. I don't think anyone's counting Pakistan out at this point.
Well, yeah, exactly. No, everything is up in the air, really. I don't know if Karim, you have anything to add, or maybe we can end the episode for this week.
What I wanted to add is
Yes.
that I think that the article and Sharmin, they are giving too much credit to the Gulf countries. My opinion, I think the United States told them be friends more with India rather than Pakistan, and that's it.
Do you think they're just following orders?
I think, yeah, because يعني me reading and like
Yeah.
living in this region, I don't think that the Gulf countries take
Credit.
foreign policy according to
Mm.
their needs. Their foreign policy is according to Israel and the United States.
Look, Karim,
Nothing's interesting.
you have this unmoving view that Arabs are 100% servile to the Americans. It's very clear that Arabs are also making their own decisions. We saw that with OPEC plus. Once you see that, you don't
That
unsee it.
there was
Hold on,
Biden,
hold on, hold
But that
on.
was for
not
Biden,
Trump.
yeah.
No. Hold on. In this case, Trump has weakened his Iran war rhetoric absolutely and announced quite the contrary on his trip to the Persian Gulf. Guess what? Those states don't want war with Iran. It'll impact their big growth and development and like enrichment program. They the Americans wanted to force Saudis into normalization with Israel. The Saudis have resisted this through two presidencies, Trump and Biden, and they're again in a Trump presidency, still resisting, managed to make Trump decouple their nuclear program that they want from the US from normalization with Israel. It's an Arab win. Let me explain. I mean, I actually gave reasons why not that Pakistan has become less important, but India's become vastly more important for the Gulf countries. I just named like business, biggest energy market, and biggest growing energy market for the Gulf. The investments, because India is a technologically advanced country or has those sectors, and the Gulf countries want to put their sovereign wealth funds into technology where they're allowed. Don't forget the Israelis and Americans don't always allow those investments, so Gulf investments in, I guess, highly sensitive tech sectors in the U.S. But if you want more, I'll give you more. Uh, there are 9 million Indians versus 3 million Pakistanis in the Persian Gulf as workers, right? So 3 times the amount of Indians. The UAE hosts over 83,000 Indian camps. Bahrain has 7,500. Qatar and Oman, 6,000 each. Kuwait, 4,000. The list, there are actual reasons why India is surfacing as a much more strategic partner than Pakistan, despite the fact that the Islamic Republic of Pakistan is a Muslim country like the Gulf countries. Okay. And then, the sort of like, the golden egg here is IMAC, in which the Gulf can, by hiding behind an India Gulf corridor to Europe, actually start doing daily trade with Israel. Okay. But it's like a US India project, right, that they're participating in, making the Gulf the major, corridor between Asia and Europe, and
It's
not
already like this, Sharmin.
Iran and Turkey, etc. You guys, it's not rocket science. The Americans ordered them? No.
So with that, we come to the end of this week's episode. We want to thank all of you for joining us. And again, to remind you to please share, to like, to subscribe, to find us on Telegram and on X. And more importantly, to please go check out our Patreon, where you can become a direct supporter of the Cradle. Help us continue to do the work that we do here. We thank you all. We thank everyone who's already become a Patreon subscriber. And, would ask everyone else to at least check it out. Thank you so much for the Cradle News Roundup. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmin Narwan.